Will, you've asked in your online analysis of the budget whether it was actually written by Jeremy Hunt, and we know from a recent profile of Rachel Reeves in the FT that she actually rings Jeremy Hunt up for advice. So maybe it was.
Yeah.
So why did you think that this had Jeremy Hunt's fingerprints on it?
I mean, perhaps I'm a little bit unfair to Jeremy Hunt sometimes, but I think in this budget you see the same patterns repeated. I mean, first of all, it does strike me as a bit crazy that you would phone up the man who has done the most to torpedo your chances of succeeding in government for advice on how to succeed in government. Because if you look at Jeremy Hunt's last budget, I think I previously described it as a plan for chaos, in that it was, setting up tax cuts that the country couldn't afford. That was the basis of the black hole. The main point in that £22 billion black hole was the cut to national insurance contributions that, had a proper spending review been conducted, it would have been obvious that the country couldn't afford. But also, he penciled in a period of austerity that he knew he was never going to have to impose because it would be up to somebody else. So those kind of machinations were a real problem for Rachel Reeves as she came into government, and then she's phoning him up. But it also sort of seems to make sense because they are kind of in the same position, and they are sort of forming the same kind of policy in that they are producing budgets where, like Jeremy Hunt's last budget, this budget is sort of backloaded, as in, most of the pain takes place in the years to come, not right now. In Hunt's case, it was really clear why that was, because he knew the Tories had already lost the next election. In Reeves' case, perhaps it's like the emergency of how unpopular they are now means you just have to do whatever you can, and that will be a problem for next year's Rachel. And then also, it's, as you said in your intro, it's the use of stealth tax. Stealth tax becoming pretty much the only game in town. Fiscal drag, bringing millions and millions more people into higher tax brackets, and governments relying on that rather than taking the potentially politically more risky option of actually just raising the basic rate of income tax.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember interviewing Jeremy Hunt for the podcast earlier this year, and I was asking him about Rachel Reeves's options, and he basically said she's going to have to do exactly the same thing that I did. Yeah. So he was sort of predicting that. Whether or not they had that specific discussion, we don't know. But that is interesting that she's taken some of his tricks, including fiscal drag. Can you explain a bit about how that works, and why is it such an attractive tool for both parties to use when they're setting budgets?
Actually, before I get to the boring bit, can I just do a massive plug for this week's magazine? Because if you want to understand all of the motivations and machinations behind this week's budget, there is no better read on it than Ailbhe's piece, cover story in this week's mag. And it is just my pleasure. And it is just a brilliant read in general. We've also got Megan Kenyon's interview with Jeremy Corbyn. You've got Andrew Marr. You've got Slavoj Žižek. You've got Anoosh going to car boot sales. You've got Tangible has interviewed Salman Rushdie. Is such a brilliant.
There's loads in there.
You've got Finn McRedmond getting drunk on Beaujolais. And if you don't like me, I was sent to a giant rubbish tip to investigate some trash. So you can always say
more on that in the next podcast episode.
Yes. Trash cast from the New Statesman. Anyway,
what was the other nicer thing that you were going to do instead that you made a pitch?
You were going to go to the CBI.
I was. I was going to go and
get a nice lunch.
I was going to have a lovely free lunch on the CBI, and we had an editorial meeting.
We all thought, actually, Will, we'd love to see you go.
Send him to the trash pile.
Send him to the trash pile. Trash. And you loved it.
I hope you wore the same suit that you would have worn to the CBI to the trash bag.
Absolutely, yeah, just with wellies on instead. And went and spent some time with Ed Davey there. So that brightened my day.
That's good.
Yeah,
of course he was there. He lives in the trash bag now.
He is wherever there is a depressing emergency. Ed will be there. That
is also visually very arresting for the country's broadcast media.
Yes, where there's a depressing emergency and a photo opportunity, Ed will be there.
Fiscal drag.
So back to fiscal drag. I'm not going to make my joke about it again. I'm sorry, I've made it too many times. But the idea of fiscal drag is that politicians, rather than having to impose tax rises on you, in an obvious way, they get inflation to do it for them. So if you set the tax thresholds and you keep them where they are, then as people's nominal wages rise, as the price of everything rises and people's wages are increased to keep up, then more and more people are pushed past those thresholds. So we are in a situation now where that has become what, some people call it fiscal creep. You've got a few think tanks talking about this being, taken as a single policy, the single biggest revenue-raising policy of the post-war era. So, and that the way that affects people is starting to become more and more significant, I think. So in the 1990s, there were basically no nurses or teachers who paid a higher rate of income tax. That was bankers and doctors. Now, a quarter of teachers pay a higher rate of income tax, and I think it's like 1 in 8 nurses. So you are moving into a situation where, millions more people are, I think actually the biggest component now is actual people starting to pay income tax in the first place. So people being moved in, so people earning more than 12.5 grand a year are then starting to pay income tax. And then the next biggest amount is people moving into the higher rate of income tax. It is a seriously big moneymaker, but it's also it's not as progressive as it looks. But it allows politicians to get away with raising a huge amount of tax. So the long freeze that Jeremy Hunt implemented in his 2022 budget, that was equivalent to a 4p income increase in income tax. So there would have been papers would have gone absolutely mental if Hunt had just raised the basic rate of income tax by 4p. It would have been absolute political dynamite. But he just went, "Oh no, we're just freezing these technical things, and eventually you'll pay more." But it's not as progressive as it looks. So
and there's analysis from the IFS this morning that basically this stealth tax, the fiscal drag, will hit lower earners more than a straight increase in income tax. So it's so
it's actually regressive compared to the other alternative option.
Yeah, and it's sort of, so in a way you could argue it sticks to the letter of Rachel Reeves's promises in the last election, but breaks the spirit of them more than a really explicit income tax rise.
Yeah.
It's also the one group of earners for whom it is not exactly a break, but like the one group of earners who aren't really affected by it as much are the top 1% of earners, because they don't have another earnings barrier to be pushed past. So had they just put another penny on income tax on every band, then the top 1% of earners would have raised a lot more from them. But they kind of get away with it, and actually it's raising a lot more from people who earn between 50 and 150 grand. And you might say those people are, earning above median income already, but you, as an economy, you do want those people to have the ambition to get promotions, to do more training, to seek new jobs, or maybe start their own businesses and that kind of thing. And if you're disincentivizing that, then that's probably not going to be great for your economic growth mission.
And even if it's politically easier than, say, putting 4p on income tax, which, like you say, would be extremely difficult, it's still sort of philosophically quite dangerous, isn't it? Because you have this situation where people are being treated as high earners but are not feeling like high earners. So you have that squeezed middle phenomenon. I know it's a cliche, but that can make governments really politically vulnerable when you've lost the middle group, because they feel disenfranchised. They feel like the social contract has been broken. They've worked hard, they've got promoted, they've got into steady, supposedly lucrative careers, and they're not feeling the return for that. And once that social contract feels as if it's been broken, then people don't feel as if they have as much of a stake in the economy as they should do, and that means that they resent tax rises. They resent the fact that public services are so poor for what they're putting in, and they probably vote you out. You've got the Reagan question: do you feel better off now than you did X number of years ago? No, I don't. And then you get other governments getting in. So even though it feels like an easier thing to do in the short term when you're putting a budget together now in politically difficult circumstances, which we'll come on to, Ailbhe, it actually probably in the medium and longer term has devastating consequences for a government.
It's Question Time guy, isn't it? It's that guy from Question Time who said, what was he on? Like 80 grand a year, but he said he didn't feel wealthy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And people laughed at him, but he was probably the most significant voice in that election campaign, wasn't he? Because he represented how everyone basically feels about their own finances. Nobody feels as if they are the rich when people say tax the rich. Ailbhe, let's come on to politically what it means if it feels like it's a Jeremy Hunt style budget. I mean, does that matter?
So I think that, I love all that analysis from Will. Obviously, Labour people, the last thing they want is for this to be seen as a Jeremy Hunt style budget. And actually, really, I think the story of this budget is that it was a budget for the Labour Party. It was a budget for the Labour backbenchers, more so really than it was for the country. Although I think most people in government would sort of dispute that last bit, and they would say it's sort of for the country as well. But pretty much Rachel Reeves has ended up doing a lot of things that she didn't go into government intending to do and pulling off a lot of her priorities. I mean, there is nothing in this budget that the OBR says will have a positive impact on growth. I mean, there's a kind of complicated argument around it where they just, there's no single measure on its own that meets the threshold for them to say that, yes, this will boost GDP by 0.1% of growth. But, it's not a growth budget, at least by the OBR's estimates, which was one of her big priorities in government, growing the economy, attracting investment. Instead, what she's done, which Labour MPs are really, really happy about, is scrap the two-child benefit cap. I wrote a piece for the website about how that has come about. It's been quite a long internal battle.
It's a brilliant piece. I really recommend everyone should read it because it explains exactly what went on behind the scenes, the push and pull to make that come about.
Yeah, thank you. So I recommend, I won't go into all the ins and outs of it, but it's been a big internal debate because basically it's popular in the Labour Party, but polling would suggest it's not actually that popular in the country. Labour people don't care. Like they think, we want to lift children out of poverty. It's the right thing to do regardless. But there has been a worry at the top of government that it just won't land well. And that fundamentally this is a government that puts taxes up to put benefits up. And
which was Kemi Badenoch's big line, which I was watching her response to the budget and it was interesting. That was the line that got clipped for the news, the news when you're watching the 6 o'clock or the 10 o'clock news, that was her line that got clipped. And I think the Conservatives will be really pleased about that because if you already feel a little bit apprehensive about a Labour government, the thing you think that they're going to do is put taxes up and spend more on welfare. And that's the line that she landed.
And then Nick Robinson put it to Rachel Reeves this morning.
Yeah. And
she stumbled a little bit coming back from it. He put it to her in a pretty strident way. And, she came back with a riposte, but it was like a little bit of a less confident performance than we've sometimes seen from her. Yeah. So it's a tricky argument to come back against because it's not really where she would have wanted to be. I mean, I think that she wants to scrap the two-child benefit cap and lift children out of poverty, but the wider package of measures is really a budget for survival, to at least make your Labour Party, like your Labour backbenchers, a little bit happier when you're facing such a political struggle. The whole government is so deeply unpopular, but if you're on the cusp of a leadership challenge to the Prime Minister and Labour MPs are plotting constantly, you've got to throw them some red meat. And I had a conversation with someone yesterday sort of saying, it seems to have landed quite well with Labour MPs, but, I don't know how it's going to land in the country. And they were kind of making the case that just party management is important. They're just sort of owning it. And it's not just unusual. Obviously, this government is struggling and in a hole. There's no doubt about it. So it makes it look a little bit like a move from a position of vulnerability. But they would say, Cameron and Osborne cut the 50p top rate of income tax to 45p. That wasn't a popular move, but they did it because they were Conservatives in government doing what they wanted to do, doing some things that would make their party happy, living their values, sort of like rewarding enterprise and, that kind of argument. And they were like, why can't Labour do the same? And actually, if there has been this argument that markets don't trust Rachel Reeves to get things past her backbenchers, it's really important to show that you can keep your party behind you. So I think that's the case for a budget to please the Labour backbenchers.
Yeah.
But it's still, I think, just quite a tricky one. I mean, the front pages today haven't been brilliant. And we're going into a bit of an experiment, I guess, where the Labour Party has got some of the things it really wants, and now we can see whether it works in the country. And people like Morgan McSweeney have been making the argument privately that scrapping the two-child benefit cap is not a popular move.
Yeah.
And now we're going to see who has been right in that big internal debate.
And how do the Labour backbenchers feel about it? I mean, has it worked? Has it placated them?
Most people are just so genuinely delighted that the two-child benefit cap has been scrapped. That's like a really, really important thing for so many Labour backbenchers. Some of them have cried in front of me talking about how it's really happening. You could see people tearful in the chamber. This is like the real core of what Labour is for, as so many of them see it. They're all thinking about the thousands of kids that they know in their constituency who'll be lifted out of poverty. So I think, that was a big moment. Rachel Reeves, as the first female Chancellor, saying that she was going to scrap the rape clause connected to the two-child benefit cap, which used to make women prove that they had been raped in order to get an exemption, which is a pretty awful bit of state intrusion. That was a big moment in the chamber. Everyone kind of had goosebumps. So I think that there's a really sort of sincere kind of feeling of being quite proud of that. But I'm being sort of understanding that Rachel Reeves has a difficult job. There's a lot of support for her. But I would say that the mood among Labour MPs more generally has not changed. I think that there's a bit of a sense of, they've bought themselves a bit of time. There's still a question of, will a leadership challenge be tomorrow or in May? It doesn't look like people are about to resign over this budget, but I don't think that was ever going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I think that, as I write a little bit in the cover story, Keir Starmer has really kind of tried to tie himself into this budget. He's tried to take personal credit for scrapping the two-child benefit cap. I have a senior number 10 source in the piece saying that policy will have his personal stamp on it. I still don't know what that meant. Still waiting for the personal stamp. But, that just like this is something he has personally pushed for. He's kind of locked himself into these decisions with Rachel Reeves. But I didn't have any sense talking to people yesterday that they credit him with doing these things that they wanted. And then I think it's, people, especially on the right of the party, or just, people who take a step back and a longer view, are still just worried about all the stuff that we were talking about, how there isn't much growth coming out of this budget, the squeezed middle that you were talking about, these like middle income people who are struggling, Number 10 spends a lot of time worrying about those people and trying to, or has in the past, since Labour got into government, 16, 18 months, it has tried to focus on making their lives better and thinks that those are the people that needs to stick with it to win the next election. And is it a budget to help those people with all these with the stealth tax? Maybe not. So I think still there are worries in the Labour Party that this is a budget that has bought Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves a bit more time, but it's not.
Yeah, because it might have alienated their base really with that raid on middle income earners, and also Rachel Cunliffe, our colleague, spotted that there were also implications for graduates as well, who would kind of be hit twice by this stealth freeze.
Yeah, well, I was going to mention Rachel's piece. It's not only they're freezing the threshold at which graduates start to pay back their student loans. So the threshold at which the graduate tax is imposed. And also, I guess, for people around that age, you've also got this threshold on pension contributions, which looks quite benign if you look at the amount of money that a given person, especially if they're early in their career, will pay in any given year, but the amounts that some of the investment platforms are talking about people losing from their final pension pot by the time they retire, people in their 20s and 30s, that could end up meaning that they have a pension pot that is tens of thousands of pounds smaller by the time they retire. So a lot of that fiscal drag is not only coming from the well-paid, it's coming from the young. And that also should be, if people recognise that, that should be a concern for Labour. But as Ailbhe said, it's not a budget that is devoid of political courage. There is stuff in there. There's things like they are facing up to the problem of not road tax, because road tax doesn't exist, but the vehicle duty that on electric vehicles that they're bringing in, and fuel duty. That's a problem for income because people are driving fewer petrol and diesel cars. So, but also the fuel duty accumulator has been frozen for 14 years. So that means that basically the government is gradually getting less and less money out of people driving cars with internal combustion engines and not replacing it with money from electric vehicles. And that's been a problem that governments have known about for a long time. Jeremy Hunt didn't bother doing anything about it. Rachel Reeves has. So there's some good stuff in there, but and obviously Hunt would not have lifted the two-child benefit cap. There are lots of measures in there he wouldn't have done. But I guess the overall kind of shape and the way in which the revenue is raised in the main is kind of has that same thing.
I remember a time when road pricing and mansion tax would have been politically impossible for either government.
Well, but this is the thing. So Rachel Reeves addressed the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, last night. So Labour MPs and peers. And that's always a kind of rallying the troops moment. She only addressed them a few days ago, and then she was back last night to sell the budget. And she was saying that they need to go out and make the argument. In a way, you might think that's quite a predictable thing to say. You go and talk to your backbenchers and say, okay, we've done the budget, now we have to sell it. We have to sell it every day. But I think that it's worth thinking about because they basically didn't do that after the last budget. Labour MPs were happy, and then quite quickly, and Labour people privately agree with this analysis, like they just went onto the defensive basically on the second day because business was hit with the national insurance increase and farmers were hit with the inheritance tax changes. And there were all these things in the budget that Labour people were really happy with, an increase in the minimum wage, more money for breakfast clubs. I can't think of more off the top of my head, but there were things that they wanted to sell and we never really heard about, and that Labour never really cashed in those wins. And obviously the wider context of the last year is that Rachel Reeves made a lot of decisions that didn't please Labour backbenchers, but the budget was actually okay. And so with this one, I think there's just a question of, do they get drowned out by this argument that, they've just put all these stealth taxes up, or do they actually say, we've increased the minimum wage again, and if you look at our distribution analysis, we have tried to shield lower earners. Overall, even though there's some stealth taxes, we are lifting hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty. Do they actually land that, or does it become a bit of an apology tour of, I'm really sorry that we're taking, you can't put as much into your pension with salary sacrifice. Oh yes, I'm really sorry that we're hitting young people. Oh yes, our mansion tax is a bit illogical because of these weird cliff edges. Do they end up just on the back foot really quickly? Do they have the political savvy, having been so weakened, to just go out and make the case?
I remember that's something Gordon Brown said to me when I interviewed him for the podcast. He was proposing the gambling levy, and he said what they should say is, gambling is causing this amount of misery in poor communities, so we're going to impose this tax and use it to pay to help get children out of poverty, and make a story about it where it all links up. And actually polling does show that people don't really like tax rises, but they do like to know where the tax would be spent.
Yeah,
and that makes it more attractive to them.
And they were really good at that in the general election campaign.
Yeah, the non-doms would pay for literally everything.
Yeah. They had different things. Yeah, they had different, certain things were paying for these things, and other things were paying for these things. But it was a kind of straight switcheroo.
Exactly,
we're gonna end the VAT exemption for private schools, and we're going to fund more teachers. Yeah. I don't think that has happened.
No, and obviously that's not really how it works.
No.
But That's the story you want to hear, isn't it? When you pay your council tax, you don't really, you know that it's all going on social care. But what you really want to hear is it's going to make your street cleaner and your potholes disappear.
It's something that Donald Trump does a lot, doesn't he? He's always like hypothecating one thing against something else. He's always saying, oh, we're going to have these tariffs, but, they'll be paid by somebody else and they'll, lead to new factories being built. There's always because people are just sort of, no one loves paying tax, but, it's a way of getting people to accept that there is actually a reason for it. It's not just going to go on, civil servants or, stuff that you don't agree with.